Paul Perrello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. Well, there is a chapter of our region's history, and perhaps for all intent purposes, there's a chapter of our national history that is literally being unearthed in the suburbs. On a tract of land west of the Malvern train station in East Whiteland, a discovery has been made on what may be the largest mass murder site in Pennsylvania history. It's believed remains of more than 50 Irish workers who succumbed to cholera have been buried on this plot of land, but there is evidence that many of the workers may have been murdered and tossed like trash in unmarked graves in an area known as Duffys Cut. Well, spearheading the Duffys Cut project is Dr. William Watson, professor of history at Immaculata University, and Shawn Swords, director of the documentary The Cut, The Journey of the Men and Women of Duffys Cut. And I want to welcome you both to the program. Shawn, welcome back to the program. You were with us a few weeks ago. I'll start with Dr. Watson here because, first of all, there's a connection to LaSalle. You actually taught here for 20 years before you made it out to Immaculata. So welcome back to LaSalle.
Thank you.
What made you decide to get involved with this project? What piqued your interest? Were there tales that you had heard about this area off the train tracks? So how did you get involved in this?
Yes, Paul, it's a very strange set of circumstances. A lot of coincidences involved in this. The documentary evidence for this that was the contextual source that we had for this actually was in my family. That was by accident. The man who created the file from the Pennsylvania Railroad days was Martin W. Clement. He lived actually at the site of Immaculata before there was an Immaculata with a family of railroaders when he was the assistant PRR, Pennsylvania Railroad Supervisor in Paoli. And when he became vice president and later president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, took this file, assembled all this information, and then kept it off limits to the public. My grandfather was his executive assistant for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And my grandfather eventually, Joseph Tripison was his name, Tripiciano, took the O off. It's Irish and Italian. But anyway, the interesting circumstances here, this thing in my family, my brother had it after my grandfather died, and I didn't see it until 2002, after I'd been at Immaculata for a number of years, and my goodness, it's a minute by car from my office. So when I saw this thing in 2002, I said, well, we've got to find out where this is near the campus and what exactly happened there. And we never in our wildest dreams imagined that we were going to be doing archaeology and forensics and crime scene investigation. We're a bunch of historians, let alone the archaeology. We had to do it all. We got people to come in and help us, thank goodness. But it's been an interesting, that was 15 years ago that this thing started.
And yet, this is, as I said at the outset of the program, it's a chapter in our region's history and perhaps even the history of the country where maybe there are other Duffys Cuts in other parts of our country, and we're just learning about it now. And yes, it's painstaking, the work that you're going through there, excavating the property, and what we see in the documentary that Shawn and his folks have put together is just one chapter, if you will, of what's going on, because there are two other digs, I guess, that ultimately are going to happen out there. We're talking a little more than 50 people at the first dig location that are believed to have been buried there. Cholera was something that was taking the region by storm at that point. And so why were these people killed then?
Well, the disease is approaching the United States across the Eurasian landmass, appearing in newspaper stories throughout 1830 and 1831. It hits the British Isles, 1831. No one knows what caused cholera. It's a time, of course, of increasing immigration as well. The beginning of what was called the main line of public works in Pennsylvania, a canal and rail system that was supposed to shorten travel time between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to 3 to 4 days, whereas before it was 3 to 4 weeks. And who would be doing that? It would be these Irish laborers, 25 cents a day if they're lucky, cheapest labor available at the time, and following the British model, because the British used them in Irish workers in the canals and the railroads in the UK. It's fear of the immigrant, fear of cholera. No one knew how to treat the disease, and it's just a sense of dread, and also a sense that the demographics of the country are shifting. You get more and more Catholics coming in, so nativism is on the rise. Our crew, we know, arrived in June of 1832, the 23rd of June in the port of Philadelphia. No one on the ship was ill. They were all healthy. They pulled into the lazaretto beforehand.
Right.
Dr. Barnes at University of Pennsylvania found that record for us, and that's an important piece of information because the immigrants are always blamed for the onset of the disease in whatever community they were in. And so when it began to hit out in the Malvern area, it was East Whiteland and Willistown townships, everybody blamed these guys. You know, this is the immigrant community in the neighborhood. They did not bring it with them. Someone excreted it in the stream that flowed through their camp, and they got it from them. But then a quarantine goes into effect. There's a lot of these in that epidemic. And there are groups of immigrants who are suspected of having cholera in 1832 in Chester County who were murdered just on the suspicion that they may have had it.
Wow.
Bodies are burned, people are killed. It's unbelievable carnage. And in our case, our guys were in the wrong place at the wrong time because that mile of track in Philadelphia and Columbia parlance was mile 59. It's 22.3 miles from Philly, so that's the Amtrak mileage.
Okay.
Mile 59 of the Philadelphia and Columbia, which was measured from Columbia out west. And that family that owned that land ran the East Whiteland Horse Company, which is the local vigilantes. And they were dependent on a local judge, very short distance from the site, named Cromwell Pierce. And for an Irishman to be in any close proximity to someone named Cromwell, just a couple of hundred years after he genocidally, Oliver Cromwell, murdered a quarter of the Irish population, was like, oh my goodness, didn't we leave this behind in Ulster? Almost all these guys were from Ulster, Donegal, Tyrone, and Derry. And their sojourn in the United States was done in 6 to 8 weeks. And the first 7 of them we know were murdered.
So when you did the excavation, so the first sets of remains that you pull up from this area, I'm going to have you geographically, I guess, describe where this area is. But the first set of remains that you bring up, you actually find bullet holes in the skulls of the remains. Yeah. So you know that these people were murdered then.
Yeah. Janet Monge of the University of Pennsylvania Museum is the forensic anthropologist working with us on this. So she looked at all these bodies and said, if they had cholera, that's not what killed them. And the first guy we pulled up was an 18-year-old male who had a case of blunt force trauma, which she says is perimortem, time of death. It's not before death, it's not after death. These are the kinds of things we needed forensic anthropologists for because we're historians, you know. You know, goes all the way, magnifying up to one guy getting an axe blow and then a bullet fired directly over top, and it was a 6-foot tall guy. The average height of these guys was about 5'4" to 5'6", roughly in that area. Very heavily muscled, accustomed to labor in Ireland, but not for any wage. They wouldn't have had any opportunity in their entire lives to earn a wage until they got here, given the economy that was, you know, very colonial and exploitive of the Irish Catholics back home.
Shawn, how did you get involved then in the project? Because you have a documentary out now, and you've been screening this documentary at a number of venues. How did you get involved in the project?
Well, initially we approached you about the railroad piece, the pilot we were going to do for Irish television. I think we might have went over this a little bit, you know, in the last time I was on the show. Was we approached Bill because he's the foremost authority in the area on the, you know, the railroad. And so when we approached him, we had done a lot of filming with them for that potential pilot for Irish television, but then Irish television ceased operations. So we had all this great footage from the interview and location things we had done with Bill and the various sites around the area for the railroad. We said, you know, a lot has happened in the last, 8 years for the Duffys Cut project that hadn't been covered in any of the previous media. Like there was which the show The Secrets of the Dead had done it, and that was all forensic based. So we said there's 8 years of narrative missing here, so there's enough for a documentary. Plus we could go more focus on the people that came over and their journey. That would be the narrative plot of the whole story instead of just you know, the sensationalism or the forensics. These were people, and they had an exposition, an entire backstory. You know, there was a middle story, and there's obviously an addendum to it now because you have 2 additional sites of mass graves in Downingtown and Spring City. So this might be a whole pandemic that was going on. So we said, there's a great story here. So we took some of the footage we had, and then we shot the entire winter last winter, the fall, and then early in the spring some pickups, and we put together the new story, The Cut, shameless plug, the journey of the men and women of Duffys Cut, and it's the entire story now, including the fact that we're going to go for, we now, because we're part of the crew, go to the additional sites and look for the other mass graves for the bodies and do all the forensics and everything, all the processes again, to prove that those two grave sites were also sites of mass murders.
Yeah.
So we've been screening that on public television, and we've been screening it at colleges and libraries throughout the area, and it's been pretty phenomenal, the response we've had to it, because nobody knows the entire story of what these people had to endure when they came over here. And nobody's taking breaks during the filming, and the Q&As they're lasting on the average probably about an hour. So it's a great compelling story. There's a lot of narrative layers, where they came from, what they were enduring, what they had to endure when they got here, that they were dead so fast, that there was a major cover-up for a year, decade, over a century and a half. And then Bill just finding out about this whole entire story, him and his brother Frank, and taking about 13 years now, going on 14 years to excavate these bodies. There's only 7 remains that are up right now, so there's still 50 more to go. So there's another level to this story, exhuming these additional 50 bodies. So we were hooked right from the beginning. It was just such a great story, and it fit with our Irish themes.
Bill, the remains are then excavated, they're brought up. Where are the remains today?
The first 7 we excavated are reburied properly.
They have been, okay.
Yeah, there are 5 who were buried at West Laurel Hill Cemetery and Belmont Avenue in Ballkinwood. And there's a vault there that is big enough to accommodate the rest of these guys. There are another 50 of them, but you shrink down considerably, Paul. I mean, it's like a G.I. Joe. You have your head is there, your skull is there, but everything else is disassembled. And so they fit in little coffins like that big. 5 of them are buried there, and 2 for whom we got an ID on the remains went back to Ireland. We have the 18-year-old male, John Ruddy from Donegal, who's buried at Holy Family Cemetery in Donegal, in Ardra. The woman, there was a woman there are actually 2 women. This woman they both would have been cooks and laundresses and related by blood to someone who was on the crew. Actually, this woman was a daughter-in-law, I should say. Catherine Burns, 29 years old, and she was from Tyrone, and so she's buried at St. Patrick's in Clonau, near Lough Neagh, and that was just 2 years ago we buried her. Finding graves over there was interesting, I mean, finding West Laurel Hill was a godsend. They've been very helpful. Kevin McCormick there, and everybody's incredible, and have agreed to help us with the remaining 50. I don't know we'll make IDs on any of the other bodies, and that's because the average age of those guys was 22. If there's a 70-year-old male, we know that he was the father-in-law of Catherine Burns. We'll get an ID, John Burns. The others are just too close in age that I don't know they'll be able to do that.
And how do you, because we're talking about deaths that occurred a long time ago, and maybe some of the relatives of these people are no longer with us either. So how do you make, even in the case of these 2 people or 3 people, how do you make positive identification today?
Yeah, this is a rare case. Again, more coincidences here, that the ship list for the John Stamp is survived in its entirety. The railroad file gave us the moment that the ship arrived that brought the guys in. And there's one single ship in that narrow time frame called the John Stamp that sailed from Derry. We actually have the advertisement even for that ship sailing. So I left in April and got here in June. And it takes 6 hours to fly across the Atlantic today. But, because Catherine Burns and John Ruddy both went back in 6 hours. But no, it took them months. And that ship list has on it the names, their ages, the county of origin, which is important, and what little, and their occupation, and then what little they brought with them. Most of these guys had almost nothing. John Ruddy had a box. I don't think Catherine Burns is listed as having anything at all. The poorest of the poor, you're talking about people who would have been living in a feudal type environment, living like serfs, for the past 1,000 years. Yeah, they got the vote in 1829, but that didn't mean anything. With the famine looming, decade and a half down the line or whatever, another quarter of the Irish population dies from that. Their lot wasn't going to be better for decades and decades and decades. And so this was like the shimmering Constantinople and looming on the horizon. We got to get there. We got to get there. First time in their lives they can make money and maybe not be discriminated against by the minority elite, of the English ruling elite, in Ireland. Ironically, I think we all believe on our research team that what they found here was in Chester County at the time a reflection of the same society that they left, because the East Whiteland Horse Company, we're trying to contain this thing. Is it just fear of the disease, or is it hatred of these guys because of who they were? Nativism was on the rise. A year before that time, 1831, there was a riot in Philadelphia that's caused by the parade on July 12th, like they do in Belfast and Derry every year, through a Catholic neighborhood to offend the Irish. And the Irish Catholics, I should say, because it was Irish Protestants who were doing it.
Right.
And that's just a year before the guys got here. You know, 12 years after this event, the nativist riots in Philly in 1844, Irishmen lynched, Catholic churches were bombed by cannon and burned to the ground. Sorry.
That's okay. While you clear your throat there, we should mention that the name of the documentary is The Cut, The Journey of the Men and Women of Duffys Cut. Shawn, is this available for purchase, or if you can't make it to a screen, or can you direct them somewhere to where they can get more information about the
you
documentary?
can. It's going to be on 4 or 5 of the local public television stations, and you can also go to IrishAmericanFilms.com.
Okay.
One word, and you can get it through there. And we'll eventually go with, probably PBS or one of the other distributors.
Okay.
We've been trying to do it regionally first, and then we're going to branch out. But IrishAmericanFilms.com is where you can get it. And we send out lots of postings on all the Irish and Catholic sites about the public television screenings. There's another one this Saturday night, I believe, at 9 o'clock on Channel 35. That would be Mine TV. And then next month it starts on 3 other channels.
Okay.
So we're going to promote it pretty well where you can see it on television.
Yeah, and you mentioned the reaction of people that are in movie theaters for these screenings, and it's pretty emotional because, as I said, this is a chapter of our history. And while we're sitting in Philadelphia, this is not that far out of our our area, the city of Philadelphia, where all of this took place. And Bill, if you could sort of give me the exact geographic location where this first mass grave was discovered.
Okay, there's out in Malvern, the corner of Malvern, East Whiteland, and Willistown, there's an intersection, King and Sugartown. There's a state historical marker there that we actually put in the ground in 2004. And it's fairly close to there. I can't give the precise location because it's private property and also now Amtrak property, but it's very close to there. And that state marker talks about Philip Duffy, the contractor, the deaths by cholera. What it doesn't mention is the murder, because we didn't know that at the time. And there is a marker that has been placed by Amtrak personnel, the IBEW guys who have been helping us on the Amtrak property, chipped in, and the Ancient Order of Hibernians, of which I'm a member and now Shawn's a member, Irish Fraternal Catholic Organization, put a sign over a stone monument by the track, so you can see if you take the R5 or Amtrak West, it'll be out the left side of the windows, and that includes murder. And it's an important part of the picture here because, if all these guys were in fact murdered, it would be the worst mass murder in Pennsylvania history. 57 guys in one place at one time. And we don't know about the site in Downingtown, where one of our guys ran down there and infected another crew at mile 48. They all died of cholera, to the last man. I think that the contractor there also died. Unlike Philip Duffy, who goes on to become a rich exploiter of his people down until 1871. He died 4 times as old as the guys he left out there, 88. But it could happen also in Spring City, where there's an Irish canal workers mass grave. And we have the okay already to proceed at Downingtown. Haven't approached the property owners out in Spring City yet, but once Duffy's Cut's done, we're going to move on to these other sites. And I got to tell you, there's sites all up and down the East Coast. John Hankey, who's an important railroad historian, early years of the railroad, B&O Railroad Museum founder, said that there were 50,000 Irishmen, or I guess immigrants from various locales who died building the railroad in about 150 years. I've calculated, looking at his figures, that in the 1820s and 1830s, you're looking at about 20,000 Irishmen alone from the figure of 50,000. But you're talking also about the Erie Canal, you're talking about the B&O Railroad, the C&O Canal, the New Orleans Canal, and probably 24 sites in between where there are these mass graves. We know these mass graves exist. There are 8,000 alone in the New Orleans Canal. It's outrageous. And are these things even in our textbooks? When the Industrial Revolution is covered in history classes, it's charts and diagrams, how many tons of iron, how many tons of coal. This is the human side of it. It's progress. I mean, we're better off because of all this stuff being constructed. Our lives are a lot easier than our great-grandparents say. But yes, progress at a huge price. I think the railroad saying that there's an Irishman under every foot of track might not be too far off the mark.
Well, when you went into this first area where Duffy's Cut is, I mean, you just don't go in with a shovel and a wheelbarrow and start excavating the area because it is Amtrak property, I guess, because the property adjacent to the rail track. So you got to get, I guess, permission.
Yeah.
As well as in subsequent, digs that you have, you need permission.
Yeah.
How helpful has the railroad been, Amtrak, in helping you in your mission to excavate this land?
Yeah, Amtrak's now on our side, and it's really nice. I mean, Irish railroaders in Amtrak have pulled for us and brought us along. It's just awesome, actually, the way that, and it's justice. It's Irish guys who are helping find earlier generations of Irish railroaders. But yeah, the levels of bureaucracy from the beginning, even getting the marker, getting permission to dig. We had to get the state and the county and the township and the property owners, because the first part of this was on private property. It gave us a lot of gray hairs. I had a lot more hair when this started. I'm telling you, I mean, it really has been an intense, and running a nonprofit, because we've created a nonprofit. Immaculata, Immaculata University has a museum dedicated to Duffy's Cut in the library. So we have a separate 501c3, and we've raised funds because these things cost money. I mean, Amtrak is on board. We still have a lot of money technically that we're going to have to spend when the big dig gets started. I don't know. I don't know where that's coming from, or whether we're going to need it all, or any, it's a lot of intangibles here, but we have a lot of help from a lot of people. There's an Irish contractor named Joe DeVoy who's volunteering all the heavy equipment from his construction company. We have loads of dig crew, my former students, Immaculata students, one of whom works here at Salle, Bob Frank, who found the first 3 bodies. Bob, if you're watching this, I hope you are. I always give him plugs. He and Pat Barry, another student of mine, they found the first 3 bodies. Those students and I smelled, and my brother and the other guys involved in this, you still smell after 150 years, believe it or not.
Yeah.
The soil looks different. It's darker than the soil around it because it's the decomposition of the organic matter, but it smells before you actually see it. And so we did get University of Pennsylvania archaeology help. Janet Monge got Samantha Cox, her assistant, to come and train our guys. My guys were taken down to the Penn Museum and shown how to put the skulls back together and everything, because you come up largely in fragments. The woman, Catherine Burns, had an intact skull, but the other guys were killed with such violent blunt force trauma that it collapsed their faces.
Wow.
I mean, it's pickaxes and axe blows, and I mean, the violence that was done to these guys. We've had people, believe it or not, it's hard to believe after all these years that there are, we still have a sectarian divide in this country. All right, I'm Catholic, my brother's Protestant, so it's different denominations on the dig crew and everything. But the thing is that there are people who come out of the woodwork and will say, didn't they deserve it, And the reason they would even say that is the sectarian issue, and you get down to the bottom line of this stuff. But, the violence that was done to these guys was like what ISIS is doing to people. I mean, that's the only way you can describe it in this day and age.
Yeah.
You can't hate somebody because of their religion. I mean, if it's a mercy killing, you make it easier for them to go, not more horrendous to go. Axe blows and bullets fired at close range. I mean,
But you talk about being at the site when the first set of remains are unearthed. Did you, in your wildest imagination, ever expect that beyond those few sets of remains that this would be such a bigger issue as it is today?
it has resonated hugely in the Irish American community and in the Irish community back in Ireland. I mean, everybody over there's got a story of somebody coming over here. Ruddy, the first set of remains we excavated, had a 1 in, I think it's 100,000 dental anomaly. It's called an M1A genesis. He never was born with his right top front molar. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, this story gets in the Irish media, and Ruddy's in Donegal today. Oh my God, we're missing our right top front molars. So we've got DNA donated. Now, knock on wood, we're going to get that DNA done eventually. Mm-hmm. You know, it's all depending on money. You know, which is, we do have a website. People, anyone who may be philanthropically inclined, we would gladly accept any donations.
What is that website while you brought it up?
It's Duffys Cut, HTTP duffyscut.immaculata.edu.
Okay.
And it's maintained out at Immaculata for our benefit in the continuation of our dig. But the Ruddys have donated DNA, and here's the thing. We get a company like Ancestry on board, and just, you don't even need names. You just put that in a worldwide database, and you're going to find collateral descendants of these guys. That's what we're hoping for. I mean, there is talk, I'm just going to say in a very general sense, of a investigative TV show and of a feature film. And I think it's just a little more than talk right now. To get to these other sites is going to take more than what we've got. I mean, we've basically, we got one grant over the years. Senator Dinniman helped us get that in 2011 for line item things, tools, and removal of a tree and stuff like that. But to get to these other sites, we're going to need more than that. And there may be a lot more on the horizon, uncovering the untold story of countless numbers of Irish who sacrificed their lives building this country, thanks to these other opportunities.
Again, the name of the documentary is The Cut, The Journey of the Men and Women of Duffy's Cut. And needless to say, we've just scratched the surface about this story. And as we say, to be continued. And we'll continue to monitor the situation out in the area of Immaculata, as well as in Chester Springs and
Downingtown and Spring City.
Spring City and Downingtown. So we'll have you back and continue to discuss your work. So I want to thank both of you for being with us. A tremendous job here, and needless to say, we've just scratched the surface on this very important story in connection with the history of our region and the United States, for that matter. Thanks so much for tuning in to this edition of the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perrello, and we'll catch you the next time around.